But there we go. It went from this to this. I mean, that's bye-bye Jimmy. All right. You know, we're getting closer. I've said that before. Every single day I get closer. This has been the project that keeps on giving, but I mean, some of that's why I take on these really lost cause projects, because I enjoy the journey and the challenge of it. You have to or you'll lose your mind. So getting close, start filling the gas tank up, and guess what happens? The gas tank leaks. Check this out. Filled the gas tank up. There's a crack all the way along where the emblem is. Leaks fuel right out of it. Now, considering the age of this ATV, 1986, there are tanks available. They'll run you about $300 for a used tank. And that used tank is probably still also from the 80s. So not a lot of options, but it can be repaired. And today we're going to do some plastic repair on this. But first, before we do that, it's full of fuel. So I have this set up, and I really like this. This has been great for pulling fuel out of units that are going into storage for the winter, so the fuel doesn't go bad. Essentially turn off the fuel flow on your tank, run it and let it run out of gas in the carb till it's dry, it stalls out. And then use this to siphon out. Nice thing to do here, just clip it to your battery, put it in the end, and this will suck that tank right down. So we're gonna pull all the fuel out of here, leave this open so whatever is in there continues evaporating out. I might still hit it with some air. I would not expect to have an issue doing a plastic repair. I wouldn't expect a spark, but if I were wrong and there was a spark and I had an open tank with a couple gallons of fuel, I mean, that's bye-bye Jimmy. Yeah, so let's get the fuel out of here and then we'll start setting up to do a plastic repair. I'll tell you, I can't quite remember the spec on how fast this pumps. Gallon a minute or so, but you know, that's fine. A couple of minutes to drain maybe a 3-gallon tank in there, and I don't have to tip it off. I don't have to flip it upside down. Super handy. I'll tell you where else it's super handy is the boat. The boat holds 30 odd gallons, and every once in a while you want to head out for a ride. You don't want to take the time to ride out to the gas station. I just siphon right off the boat and throw that F3 fuel right in the wheelers. All right, we pulled about, this wasn't quite empty, but probably close to 1.5 gallons, 2 gallons out. So I'm gonna leave that tank open. I'm gonna go grab a coffee, let that air out, evaporate a little bit. Then we're gonna come back, set up, repair that leak. Got to working away while the tank was evaporating and thought I gotta slow down and explain this. So looking to replace the tail light, I went on, got a replacement tail light, and I goofed because this Trail Boss tail light has a multi-function plug, 3-prong. So you've got light on, you've got your neutral, you got light on, but you've got light bright if you're applying the brake, where this is not a multifunctional. In this 86, it is on or off. Whether if you have low beam, high beam on the handlebars, it's on or off. So I couldn't reuse this backing plate, it's different. This one has press-in tabs. This one, if you take off the cover, has 2 nuts to secure to a backing plate here. So the lens is good. Lens is the same size. The trouble is, and I'll have to show later, but there's only 1 post to secure to behind here. So what I've done, and you can't see it through here, but it's a long screw built up with JB Weld. There's a nut on the end of the bolt in the JB Weld, and I'm just holding it there to dry. Basically, I'm fabricating a post on the inside of the housing. It's just these little details, and every once in a while you hit it just right, and sometimes you goof, and this time I goofed on the rear light assembly here, but there's enough pieces here to salvage with a little creativity. All right, so let's get down to the plastics. The tank, here's the plan. Sandpaper 220, some Brillo, some lacquer thinner because I don't have any alcohol to wipe and clean up with. And then I have a plastic welding kit. Here's the welding kit. Now here's the challenge here. I've done plastic welding before, but usually I have access to both sides of the plastic and I can press staples in from one side to really reinforce. This one's tough. This is going to be down in a groove here. The biggest issue here is I don't know what kind of plastic this is. I don't know if this is ABS. I don't know what kind of poly this might be, what kind of plastic blend. So trying to use the filler rod could create issues. If this plastic filler rod doesn't blend with this tank, it could literally just peel right back out, and I really don't get any kind of seal in here. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to clean this. I'm going to rough this up well with some sandpaper, and I'm hoping that I can just use the tip here to get in and rebond, reblend this. And I don't want to poke through the tank, but with any luck, I'll still be able to put the emblem back on here and seal this up. But only trying is going to find out. So here we go. This is the acetone to clean it up. And in case you're wondering, I do have a fire extinguisher handy just inside the shed door, in case things go bad. Just starting to get there. Gonna go slow, but it looks like just sitting in the corner right here, sitting down in the groove, and running back and forth with a steady hand. And I'm angling the tip just up a little bit, almost like a sled. I mean, I bet you just like that, it's actually sealed. But would it hold up on the trail through flexing and everything? I'm gonna have to keep on going for a bit. I don't want to reshape the plastic. Everything is keep your face out of these fumes. You do not want to be breathing plastic fumes. That is not good for you. So all this is burning off. If you're not wearing a mask, open area and keep out of those fumes. I mean, this is tough. When I press, it still flexes right in that groove, kind of implying just how thin the plastic is right there. The only way I can think to improve that is to see about building it up. Let's let that solidify and solid up for a bit. And while that solidifies, I'm going to swap out the pull start. I found a low-cost pull start for this model. Power Sports Nation, great spot to go check for used parts. They had one. I'm going to oil it, grease it, but it's intact, so we're going to pop this off, put this in. I am working on trying to refinish these floorboards. Trick is on both sides there was a rusted nut that went through, threaded in to secure them on the back here, and both of those snapped trying to get them out from hand. So I am slowly working through getting those out. As you can see here, drilling them so I can get these out, clean them up, get them repainted, as opposed to trying to do this on the unit. But that's going to be for another day. There we go, guys. Pull start. It's funny how the work goes sometimes, because the other one I had cleaned up and polished and painted so it would look nice, and now here I am putting a beat up one on. You know, there's going to be details down the road. Just I like a cleaner unit, so trying to get all this cleaned up, some SC1, some paint. But I'm ready to get this one on the trail, if I can get it on the trail reliably. So we are still waiting for a replacement top end being done out by Rick Ritter Cycles. So we'll have a freshly bored and matched to a piston. Again, the one in here, we put a new piston and rings in, and the rings were in spec at the top of the cylinder, and I didn't check at the middle, the bottom of the cylinder for the ring spec. So there's still low compression in here. On a hot day like today, it'll fire and ride. But some days it'll really fight you to get going. So we are still fighting low compression on here. Enough to fire, but not great. But we are getting really close. I've got some details to do off camera that I'll do. I'll probably wait for that top end to come in to do the new chain, new sprockets. But let's get the wheels back on. Let's start putting the plastics back on. Let's start getting this thing to look like a finished product. Oh boy, parts everywhere. Blaster parts, blaster parts, blaster parts. There it is in the back. Plastics. Here we go, plastics for the Polaris. These have already had a good amount of cleanup done on them. I'm going to bring them over, I'm going to replace the heat shield tape goes around the exhaust here. If you've been following the channel for a while, the Big Bear that I rebuilt for my mother, one of the parts ATV that I procured for it had caught fire right in this area. It was a Yamaha, and a lot of the Yamahas, they have a metal heat shield. The exhaust is here and there's a metal heat shield, and someone had been working on it. They left the heat shield off, and the plastics caught fire around that exhaust. And I ended up buying that one for parts to get the other Big Bear together. So this is important. If you're going to ride hard on a hot day, you could, and it has happened, catch an ATV on fire. Let's get this cleaned up a bit. I might have to zoom in so you can see it, but the plastic is already melted. I'll bring the camera over once I get this cleaned up a little. As I was just saying, this area takes a lot of heat, and I've seen ATVs catch fire here before. That heat tape that I just peeled off that was all cracked up, you can see heat has made it through, starting to hit this plastic. Now this is really thick, beefy plastic. I don't see plastic this thick on a lot of modern ATVs. It's thicker down here, thinner up here. So there's a lot here, but this needs to be protected. So this is just heat shield tape from AutoZone, and we're gonna layer it on right here to build this whole protection area back up. There we go. I did a half overlap all the way through the middle here, so it's effectively 2 layers. Underneath here is where the plastic was starting to bend out. Lapped it over just a touch, trimmed it with an X-Acto knife. So kind of replicating the factory had here. I'll be interested to pay attention once it comes together with the exhaust sitting up under this rear fairing. There's no damage. So let's go see about starting to get some of these plastics back on the ATV. It's always an exciting time when the plastics start going back on. You're starting to do some of the touch-up stuff. It takes a little while, the details, but you know you're getting close. You know what I don't want to find out is to get these plastics back on. I got to take the handlebars back off to lift the tank, to set everything back in. But I'll tell you what, that does look like what I'm going to have to do here. The bars are loose, so that now the tank is loose, so that the plastics can slip more into place. And okay, starting to fall together here. Starting to come together here. I've got to refigure out how to mount these front plastics, because I remember I couldn't mount the gas tank until I had the plastics in there, because the bolts that go up through the frame go up through the front fenders into the tank. The plastics, the mud flaps will mount down to the floorboards. So they'll secure in the back, they'll secure in the front. And we can now get our handlebars back on yet again. Got to figure this out. Feels as though these plastics are not sitting, they're not all the way down, because they'd be below the floorboards. So I think that this is going to go, under the tank. So I'm going to put the bars back on now. This is sitting here, finagle a little bit to get everything setting, because this isn't necessarily screaming exactly where the puzzle pieces go. All right, we're getting it. Coming in at an angle, slips it right down underneath the tank, falls right down into place for air filter brackets, setting down on bump stops. So that was the trick there. And now it's down ready to be mounted to the floorboards. Front will still settle in. Now I am trying not to get too far ahead of myself here, because I do have a snorkel system that needs to go in. Oh, and my vent's back behind the plastic. So here I am getting a little ahead of myself. I'm gonna have to take these three out, escape this back. I've got to get this screw out. We've got to get this mounted in before the rear plastics go in. So take a quick step backwards here. Before we put this back on, let's hit it with some SC1, bring back some shine. So getting there, on the front here, there's two Phillips nuts that go in to hold this hose, this breather tube. One thread's in fine. The other one here, this rubber grommet has threads in it, and it's spinning, so I'm not able to really get in there on it. The other thing I'll call out is, this is where we're going to make the joint. These are the rubber sleeves that go over that Polaris sells here, and they keep failing. There was one up here and, flexing around. This one split. I had a second one because I bought one for both. And this one split. So layers of electrical tape have been what I'm doing. I might wrap this and then electrical tape to give a little more flex stability, because there's a lot of gap here, but these are just not holding up for anything. So let me get this sorted out and we'll continue on. There it is, just popped it out, but it's just spinning down in here. So I'm gonna touch this with a little bit oh boy, see what I have around. Probably gonna be some crazy glue if I have that. If not, just a touch of JB Weld, then it's gonna have to sit. All right, for these brackets, I have all of them that I salvaged here. They've been through the tumbler, but some are in really tough shape. So I'm going to pick the 4 best that I have in this pile. I think those are going to be the 4. I'm going to give them a coat of paint with that satin, and then we'll start getting those on. I kind of keep getting rained in and out here The rain on and off today, but getting closer. Said that a million times. This has been a long series, but a really educational series for me, and it's really exciting to be getting to about this point here. Got my panels in behind each of the I'll call them fairings, holding that in. Starting to get some of the racks on here, secured underneath. This one is interesting. This is why it's all smashed. This just bolts to the plastic. So any flexing on the rack, this is how you hold these fairings up. There's no structure underneath. That's just a pinch on the plastic. And in the back, we've got this one. I've got to work through the front and ready to start putting some wheels on. But I'm going to settle in and start continuing to do some finishing touches here, and get this ready for, I guess, a final reveal. It's always a little bit... So here's the tough thing doing a project here. At some point in the project, I have to make some concessions and accept some things will not be perfect, but it's good enough, it's reliable enough, it's not perfection. You always have this dream of being able to really restore something back to original. This is pretty good, but I'm starting to get to that point. I'm like, I'd like to keep doing this and I'd like to keep doing that, but it's time to put this on the trail. We'll keep maintaining it in years to come. But yeah, there's always that point, and we're at that point where it's time. It's time to put it back together. So this is the one I've got to study a little bit. These holes here are going to be for the front rack. Front rack sits down in, and there are threaded holes up here for that. How do the plastics mount? Back, if I can show you, back on the tank, there were studs, and this tank does not have those studs, so we're not going to mount there. We have mounted down low. Up high here, going to be the same thing on the rack. It's going to hold the fairings up. Is there any other way that holds these plastics on to the front? Down low to the fairing. I really don't see anything other than, I was just mentioning, it would have been studs here. And nothing on top of the shock towers, but the rack would keep this from continuing to dig in. I mean, I think that's it. I think we put the rack on. It just feels weird. Feels weird because even if those studs were on the tank, it would just be holding the plastic of the tank and the whole front could still flex like this. And this is two-piece, so this piece doesn't, it's just the rivets here. There's nothing that it screws to up top. Weird, but we're gonna get things secured and keep going from there. We're raining again, and it's dark out. It's only like 4 in the afternoon, so I'm in here cleaning up some nut threads, getting ready for the end push here. Got 2 cleaned up and matched up for the front of the rack. Working on 2 to secure here. And these are, 3/8 inch head, 1/4 inch threads, 20 pitch. But these threads, and I tumbled these, but these threads, they need to work. There's the thunder. Just won't stop raining. These threads are so bad I've had to use my impact to go through because I can't do it on my regular handheld drill. That'll work for what we need. Boy, I just can't beat the weather this year. So fortunately we're working undercover, so I'm gonna keep going. It's pouring again. All right, I gotta wait for the front rack to dry. It's not gonna dry today, pouring off the roof here. But yeah, good push today. I think we're lined up just to finish that, and after that, we're riding. We've got the snorkel on. We've got the belt drive all sealed up. The wheels are painted, and look at those. Came together pretty nice. I did something a little different. I painted the nuts the contrast color here just to give it a little pop. I kind of like that. We have a high beam. We don't have a low beam. We've just glued our grips on. Choke is now tuned in. Topped off the reservoir. That's a quart. There's a quart and a half in there. Probably holds 2 quarts. And fuel is in, and it's above the line, and we're not leaking. But I've got to get inside undercover and clean up some of this, because it's just summer 2023 around here. Just mud. Here's what's left, guys. We have 4 tires, dry rot. 1 out of the 4 hold air. Clutches, we salvaged the better clutch of the 2. This one, boy, we had a bunch of oxidation eating down in here. Came down to the transmission. We had flat teeth when you clicked into reverse. For the motor, I should mention these gaskets are very difficult to find here to seal in the back of your clutch covers. We've got a motor lower end. We do have 2 working oil pumps. There was no stator that came with, so we're missing a stator. Top end for this one is out being redone. Top end we're running, we're able to get pistons and rings for it to be in spec, but we're going to get the other one is being professionally bored and a matched piston, and then we can get a second motor back together. But we were also missing the pull start assembly when we got it. We were missing the stator assembly and stator cover, so motor came missing some pieces. We have the other driven clutch system, and on the clutch covers, highly warped. Trying to put these together, there's no seal. You can just see how bananaed it is out there. And then with some of the wobble, we had holes in the case. Mice were living in here. They were eating gaskets. Just a nasty mess there. Clearly everything had been sitting. Lots of dry rot in some tires. And sometimes I'll tube tires so I can keep on running them for a while, get some life out of them for a season before doing anything else. And here what we have left on the frame. You remember the carburetor was completely just oxidized dust inside, so that was gone. This frame is tweaked up front. Headlight housing missing. Obviously bar wraps really chewed up there. On the front rack coming through, I had to pillage from here. It was missing tabs. So this rack is actually tweaked. The whole thing is bent back in this direction. The other rack that I ended up using has a bit of a horseshoe kind of mount here, which I liked, and it was straight, but it was missing, like as you see here. There should be a tab on both sides. This is important because your plastics for the fairings mount up under here. Without securing to the tab, every bump you hit, it's just smacking around, making all kinds of noise. So I ended up cutting the tab off this rack and welding it to the other rack so I could have that full symmetry, secure the plastics. We had cracked out throttle covers here, so we had the Salvage. And this one was interesting even getting into it because we found early on during our diagnosis there's no thread. That was just a weird solution there. Snapped off choke capabilities. The exhaust, both exhausts fairly intact. Interestingly though, if I were to flip this one over, there's a big hole in the bottom where this bolt goes for the bumper missing here. So it was just blowing exhaust out the bottom. Fixable things. Rear brakes, these aren't made anymore. These are salvageable. This one's still salvageable. Got to find pads if needed, but I'm finding pads. DennisKirk.com has the pads if you need them, because these pads have a little pin here in each side. Keeps them from spinning, rotating, and makes them easier to get out. And finally, we had to work through things like this. Here's a brake rotor, real rough shape. Seats, you can always do a seat cover, but this one, early on we found some broken damage through here. The other seat was in better condition. So that's what's left. I do have the plastics, the front and rear, the light blue ones, pretty smashed up plastics. Pretty smashed up. I'd like to think I could salvage them. It would take some real time. Not a lot left for a second wheeler here. Hip shot, if I were to try and put this together back on the trail, minimum $1,000, and it would be absolute Frankenstein, where I was just showing you, I've cut tabs off of racks, smashed up plastics, tires that would need to be tubed. I think a reliable motor would be easy enough. The belt system be a little wonky. If I wanted to spend money to protect the belts, that starts to add up. The covers that I have here aren't going to keep water, mud out. All kinds of couplings. I would need a carburetor. There's no air box on here. So the list would really keep going. So I've got good parts. I've got a good roller. But as I was kind of saying before, there comes a point where you have to make some concessions and kind of understand where you're at. I'm not going to try and turn this one into a second Trail Boss. We've got one good Trail Boss running. We've got some good parts here. If needed, I can share some out with the community for other people's trying to build these, because, well, many of these parts aren't made anymore, so it's tough to keep these rolling. Yeah, we're not getting two out of this, but we got one good one. So that's where we landed. We have 4 tires holding air. None of them are tubed. A little dry rot in the front, but that's okay. These plastics really didn't need repair. They had paint on them, so we had to get paint remover, get that cleaned up. After getting it cleaned up, they've been hit with SC1 to kind of bring back some of the shine. If you recall, the back had paint all down them. This seat here has the full latch underneath, clicks in. Haven't really figured out why both of my seats have curled back in this regard versus sitting in. Maybe just from sitting out in the sun for as long as they have. You saw we restored the front. We disassembled everything for the upper handlebar areas here, painted. We've also done some SC1 in here. We had to do electronics so that we had the various lights going and working again. Tough to see, but there's our neutral. We have reverse. We have low beam and high beam. Choke is working. From the working caps here, we were able to rebuild the throttle, clean this all up, paint it. I mentioned a moment ago the missing tabs. Interestingly, from all the rubber boots that I had bought for the various intakes that didn't work, I put this little rubber underneath here. I'm going to get some circular grommets so you don't see this, but it just kind of helps protect the plastic from the metal rubbing on it. But this is referring to, without this, your plastics when you hit bumps would just be banging. This tab was missing on this rack. I cut it off the other rack, welded this on. This is that nice horseshoe that I liked on here. This rack is nice and straight. I also, usually underneath here, there's plastic inserts to protect the metal on metal rubbing and squeaking. I use some rubber from some of those failed gaskets. So this is nice and tight, no noise. We got a pull start. The pull start assembly was all bound up and broken inside. I ended up buying a used pull start assembly. You remember the transmission, had to swap the transmission. You remember going through the oil pump, getting that fixed up. Exhaust was painted with a high temp paint. You remember the fuel line situation there really bothered me. We have the Predator 500 petcock that goes off to the left on this side from the 2003 Predator 500. A lot of protection on that fuel line. Behind the plastics here, you saw me recoat all this with the heat shield just because of how close it sits to the exhaust. And we saw already some melt damage back underneath. And when I look at this here, I might even add more. I've got a finger width between the plastic and the exhaust there. I don't like that, so I'm probably going to get some more tape for the backside here. And then there is no protection up high there. There's more clearance. We're going to pay attention to it. You saw the wheels. You saw how we restored those wheels there using the playing card trick. Really came out nice. We'll see how well it holds up. And finally had to hunt a replacement rear light, all smashed up here from a newer unit. So I had to kind of do some Mickey Mouse work with some JB Weld to make another post back here. But we got it. Now I should be able to tighten this down now that everything's set up. So what did I learn on this one? Well, parts very difficult to find for this unit. So really having the spare parts unit was key. Without that, I don't know how successful I would have been. Just because as you're looking for parts, you're going through places, Dennis Kirk, Rocky Mountain ATV, you're going through eBay, you're hunting through communities, Facebook, Marketplace and all that. They only made this unit for a few years. I think 85 was the first. This is an 86. I'm fairly certain there's an 87 out there and then they swapped over, but I could be wrong on that. So really I learned that you've really got to salvage everything you can on one of these, because you're not going to buy a new rear brake housing. You're not going to go find a rear brake rotor. But this is peppy, so we're going to get this out on the trails. You'll see this coming in some upcoming trail videos. So I hope you enjoyed that. This was a longer series, a lot more learning on here, different kind of setup. But there we go. We did it. We started this on a warm weekend in February. It's now early August. Went slower, but we salvaged a 1986 Trail Boss 250 two-stroke.